the best thing you can do in Bernal Heights is spend time in Bernal Heights. And then the best way to really start to learn about why everybody's so enthusiastic about it is just to walk around.
Yeah, just get lost in Bernal.
Yeah.
Get lost in Bernal.
Park your car,
Okay, I like
walk
that.
around.
I like
I've done that
that.
many
Yeah.
times in my lifetime.
Welcome to the Bay Insider with Amanda and Ying, where we talk about history, lifestyle, and real estate in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Welcome back to the Bay Insider. And today I have with me, of course, Ying, my partner in crime. And we are very lucky to have Todd Lappin with us. Today we're going to be talking about Bernal Heights, and I can't think of anyone better. As you may know, I lived in Bernal Heights from 2006 through 2020. During that time, one of the resources was the Bernalwood blog, which Todd Lappin wrote from 2009 through...
Yeah, roughly 2010 to around 2019-ish.
So you've lived in Bernal Heights for how long?
I've been in Bernal since 2005, so I guess that puts me around 20 years. And I've been in the Mission for 35. So I joke about it. I've been in the same zip code for 35 years, which is a little weird. I don't think of myself as like a same zip code kind of person, but
you are.
Turns out I am, yeah.
But as you said, Bernal is many different neighborhoods in one, right?
Yeah.
So not quite the same thing.
So you get to experience all of that. And you're
Exactly.
in the Presida Park area?
Yeah, I'm right. I live right near Presida Park, just north of Presida Park, between Presida Park and Mission Street.
Okay.
Exactly. And I drove by yesterday looking for your little red fire truck and
Yeah.
couldn't find it.
Cleverly hidden inside.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us that story.
Long story, but I'm kind of a Japan geek among the many things that I'm a geek about. And I'm a car geek, and those things kind of combined. And then after they combined for a little bit, I realized that there are these little tiny fire trucks in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought one over. I ordered it, I think like 2 weeks before the pandemic began. Sent some money to some guy in Japan saying, send me a fire truck. You know, the world was normal. And then it showed up, I guess, 4 months later or so in a very different world. And it became sort of kind of like an escape pod. You could just drive around in this little fire truck, and it was safe because I was, self-contained and not hurting anybody. And just, it was just this weird way to like explore the city.
And kind of bringing joy to everybody.
Yeah, and anybody who was on the street, there was like that sort of zombie apocalypse phase.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have like special music as you drive around?
I do, actually. I do. In Japan, they often will play public address announcements through the siren.
All right.
Like they'll drive around and go, it's Fire Prevention Week. Let's all be careful and not smoke in bed. There's like input jacks into the siren. So I can run my iPhone through the siren. And
awesome.
I just play music a lot.
Oh, nice.
In fact, I drove through West Portal this weekend. I was playing Christmas music. I was playing the Andrews Sisters, Winter Wonderland.
I imagine that is so
And I bet
cool.
people are like pointing.
Yeah, it's just kind of, again, it sounds kind of ice cream truck like, but it's a fun way to just go around the city because it creates this wonderful, there's this look I've started to just gotten used to seeing on people's face. It's like a combination of confusion and delight.
Yeah.
I was thinking delight, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of delight, but there's also confusion. Just like you can just,
but
what is going on? And they're sort of tilting their head and smiling at the same time. I see it a lot. Yep.
Bernal has steep hills.
Yeah.
Like many, many steep hills. Actually, one of them is the steepest ever, right, in the city.
It's true.
Bedford Street.
The steepest street, not just in the city, but probably in the country.
Right. 41 degrees. So does your fire truck just...
Yeah, the people always ask that. And it turns out Bernal Heights is a lot like rural Japan. Like in a lot, like no, it really is like uneven roads and very steep hills. So, and I say this, and it's not even a joke. The truck was literally designed for places exactly like Bernal Hill. So it is completely comfortable there. So any hill, things like that little fire truck, they're used in rural Japan as farm trucks. So they kind of need to be able to go anywhere. So they're not necessarily fast, but they're not limited. You know what I'm saying? Right. It may not be the fastest thing up the hill, but it's not going to struggle to get up the hill. It's
right.
Just,
and if you have to get somewhere in some tight spot.
It's kind of like a mule. You know what I mean? Like a mule or a donkey. It's going to get there. So hills are actually not just like no problem. It's almost like it sort of feels like it's just like, yeah, I was made for this.
Oh, and your truck has a name, right?
Yeah, its name is Kiri. The truck, it's Kiri. And long story, but it's from this little town in Japan called Kitagamane, Kiri.
Okay.
Kirigamane. And literally, the character Kiri in the word Kirigamane means fog.
That's perfect.
Yeah. So the town, if you translate the characters into English, it literally is called Fog on the Mountaintop, which is a pretty
Wow.
good
Apropos.
San Francisco name.
So
Yeah,
fitting.
pretty Bernal and pretty San Francisco name.
Yeah.
So we just named it Kiri.
Wow.
So that's like a mascot.
Yeah.
Bernal Hill now.
Yeah.
Very
All
cool.
right. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
so just to kind of finish the introduction of Todd,
Ex-Bernalwood,
Fire Todd,
weird fire truck guy.
yeah, who works on user interface technology stuff and has been a journalist and an editor for Wired and Time and
Yeah, I was spent about half my career being a magazine editor, and for the last 15 or so years, I've worked in technology doing interface development.
So when you first decided to make this blog, Bernalwood, like what was your process? How did that
Process is
happen?
probably a little bit more rational than I think it was, but mostly it was I had actually was starting to pivot towards doing not journalism anymore, but I still kind of enjoyed journalism. And so it sort of started as a combination of, and also blogging was the thing. I just felt like there was no news source or anything for Bernal Heights that felt like the neighborhood I lived in. There was some stuff, but it just always felt a little stilted or like there was stuff with agendas. And I thought that there was an opportunity to just have a lot more fun with
and build community. I mean, I
yeah,
think
build
you
community
a lot of
and
community.
sort of create the neighborhood that I felt like I actually lived in, which was one where people were just doing interesting, cool stuff. And partially I was relatively new to the neighborhood myself at the time, and so it was also just a way to learn.
Yeah.
So, and it was a way to do journalism as a hobby rather than do journalism for money, which was actually fantastic. It was like
Yeah.
the best thing I ever did about Bernalwood was never try and turn it into a business. That was the smartest thing I ever did.
Yeah, now it's a Facebook group and there's like 6,000 members, right? Something
Yeah,
like
then
that.
after about 9 years, the stories were starting to repeat themselves a little bit. But I really was into the community that had been created. So turned it into a Facebook group. It's pretty loosey-goosey, and I don't do much other than moderate it. And I just try and keep it news focused.
Cool. So the geography, for anybody who's listening who's only mildly familiar with Bernal Heights, it's basically east of Noe Valley, Mission, Glen Park area, west of the 101 and Bayshore, and then south of Mission, north of Excelsior, Silver Terrace, kind of that. But everything surrounding the hill, basically.
Well, yeah, again, this has been a running joke and a little bit of controversy over where are the boundaries of Bernal. 3 of them are very easy, and 1 of them is very hard. 280 to the south, 101 to the east, Cesar Chavez to the north, and then basically the contentious and fun part is what's the western boundary? And the western boundary, I've always so is it just the hill? Is Mission Street part of Bernal? I'm going to just assert my preferences. I claimed in the name of Bernal Heights basically everything up to San Jose.
That makes sense. But if you Google Bernal Heights in Google Map, St. Mary's Park and the Lost Tribe of College Hill, that's not part of
St. Mary's isn't in there? Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't know if I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the Google search you're doing, but most of the other searches, I definitely find St. Mary's Park and the Lost Tribe of College Hill, which is where I lived.
Yeah.
Which is always, before I moved there in 2006, I mean, I had no idea that little slice of area existed, because it really is. It's just like a strange little tribe.
Yeah, that little area between San Jose and Mission Street as you head south along Mission Street. Yeah. So we claim Mission Street for sure. The Mission always tries to claim Mission Street, which
as Mission,
which I think is no. They get it up to Cesar Chavez, and then after that, it's Bernal Heights.
So they get a break of Bernal Heights. They have the outer Mission.
Then when you cross Cesar Chavez, you are part of Bernal Heights. You are not in the southern part of Mission Street.
Yeah.
and then over to San Jose. It's probably worth taking a little minute. The whole La Lengua thing, which was a term coined by a friend of mine. Basically, that Burrito Justice, who's a great guy who lives on Tiffany.
Okay.
And basically, the area between San Jose and Mission Street, he named it La Lengua because it's loosely shaped like a
tongue, right?
And basically didn't really belong to anybody.
Mhm.
But we had a lot of fun joking about treaty disputes and all that sort of thing.
And it's amazing how animated people can get.
Yeah, people get very animated. And again, every part of it is, I enjoy the provocation of just like calling something, and then all the old timers, they start going, we never called it that. When Truman was president, we never called it that. And I think that's hilarious. So anyway, he calls it La Lengua. We still call it La Lengua, but we do consider La Lengua part of Bernal Heights. And part of the reason is because it's sort of who else really makes any sense. Yeah. We want to have access to the resources that exist there, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Yeah.
And so we're going to include a link in the notes where you can see the map that Todd made. Yeah. So it's basically got a number of sub-districts within Bernal Heights, because Bernal Heights is one of the few neighborhoods in San Francisco that within the neighborhood, there are multiple different neighborhoods. So, I mean, you've got everything that's right up on the hill there. And that's still very rural feeling when you're up around Bernal Hill.
Yep.
Very much so. I was there yesterday. I couldn't believe.
There's some dirt roads.
At the top of Bernal Hill is still very rugged. Used to be a lot more rugged. Mm-hmm. The short history of it is that it was nothing for a long time. It was owned by the city. It was quarried and mined for a long time. There was a quarry there. But really, it was nothing. And in the 70s, I just only because I've seen a lot of videos of it.
The dirt bikes?
There were dirt bikes. Kids were just dirt bikes. It was like a dirt bike track. So people would just ride motorcycles all over it. But then it became a park. Basically, when a bunch of young activists started moving in the late 60s and the early 70s, they turned it into a formal park.
Yeah, and back then in the late 60s, early 70s, they called it Red Hill, right?
They called it Red Hill then,
because of dirt?
No.
Because of politics.
Yeah, because of the politics.
I was looking online and saw some of the videos of the dirt biking in the 70s. And actually, my dad lived at, I think it was 5 Wall Street.
Uh-huh.
And I was growing at the very top, like the last house right before the hill. And that was in the late 70s, early 80s. And I remember we used to go up there and, hike around the hill. And it used to be like a dump, too. People were just dumping.
Yeah, people would dump trash all the time.
All over the place. And one time we found, it must have been like 1981 or something, we found a black and white TV, one of those big ones. And I was so excited, because that was exciting back then. We brought it back, and my dad's very mechanical. He's a, auto mechanic. And so he took the whole thing apart, and cockroaches came out of this. I mean, it was completely infested.
Oh, that's horrifying. That's a good premise for a science fiction or horror film.
Totally horrifying.
Yeah, that is horrifying.
But you know what? He cleaned it out, took them out, and he fixed the TV, and that was my TV.
Still, I don't know if I could ever recover.
Yeah, it was pretty disturbing. But yeah, it's interesting, all of the iterations that the hill has gone through over the years. I mean, in the whole area, go way back in time, right? Was dairy farms up there? Yeah,
Bernal was has always been kind of a little bit of like a wild sort of agricultural frontier within San Francisco. It was originally literally was a ranch, and owned by one guy, Jose Cornelio Bernal, who was an early pre-United States Mexican settler to the area. And it was basically, there were a lot of dairy farms around Bernal Hill, and that slowly got subdivided. But it also meant that while it was getting subdivided, there were still pockets of agriculture and essentially what we would associate with like Sonoma-like activities going on.
I would say Bernal Heights probably has the largest like chicken to owner ratio.
Yeah, a lot of the high chicken. Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah. There's a lot of hen houses going on. But yeah, there was people who were saying they were finding gold, right? In 1870, 1876, there was some false gold.
Yeah, well, as you know, there was a lot of that going around. People, claiming to find gold. Because everybody was looking for gold everywhere, and Bernal was like a big hill, so maybe there's something. But really, we're taking it to talk about geology. Yeah, a Bernal geology moment is actually really worthwhile because it is something that's pretty cool. You mentioned the 1906 earthquake, and one thing that's really great is like Bernal was not affected by that barely at all, and that's because Bernal is literally a piece of rock, and the whole hill is made of chert, which I only know this because I did Bernalwood, so I want to be really clear. Like this is me.
Made of what?
over years working out myself. Chert, which is kind of a
same thing in Glen Park.
Yeah, Glen Park is too. It's basically a mineralized form of biological matter, layers and layers of little, all those little creepy crawly things, crustaceans that become kind of compacted into layers of rock. And that's what Bernal is. And then there was some earthquake forces that basically forced the floor of the ocean way up. So what you're looking at in Bernal Hill is basically ocean floor up on the ground. Yeah. The really important thing, especially for anybody who lives there or is thinking about living there, is that it's a really good place for earthquakes. It's very, very stable and is not really affected by any faults because you have several hundred feet of bedrock underneath the neighborhood. So it's a big bonus. It's not like sand out here. This is all sand.
Yes.
Like
sand and then landfill.
Yeah, or landfill, which you have a lot in other parts.
After the 1906 earthquake, obviously they put all the earthquake shacks out in Presidio Park and people stayed there. But then they also, it made a real estate rush to the area because
everyone saw what had not happened.
Right. It's like, okay, this seems safe. Let's do that. And then I also thought it was interesting in 1938, one of the public works projects, Arthur Brown, the architect who did City Hall and the War Opera House and I guess the Ferry Building too, designed and built the first public housing.
Yeah, the public housing that's still there near Holly Park was one of the very first public housing projects, certainly in the city. I don't know about anywhere else. And it had a celebrity architect. And
then the whole St. Mary's area, which is very different than everything else because it was a totally planned community, right? Okay. It's got its own shaped like a bell.
It was shaped like a bell. First of all, they had to carve an unbelievable amount of the hill out to create it because it's relatively flat now. And the picture's unbelievable of it was in those days when they'd be like, you know what? Let's just create some terracing. And that's what they did. And, and it's like at the scale of it is unbelievable by today's standards. I mean, not today would be obviously technically a lot easier. We just don't do that anymore. No. And so they're doing it out there with steam shovels and stuff. But St. Mary's was a sloped area that basically got terraced into this thing shaped kind of like a bell. And the other part of it, which is also the big tell, is that architecturally it's basically the sunset. It's literally the same house plan as you have Dolger kind of houses, like you have Henry Dolger style houses, like you have in the Sunset and the Richmond, but it's in Bernal because again it was built at the same time, that late 20s, early 30s when all that stuff was going on.
Yeah, I think they started in 1924 or something. They did laid it out. So Mark Daniels, who developed it, was the same person who did Forest Hill.
Yeah.
Okay, so pardon the interruption here in the middle of everything, but as we were recording, we found a moment where the recording had stopped and then we had to pick it back up again. So just to put these two parts together, we were finishing up talking about St. Mary's Park that was designed by Mark Daniels, who also did Forest Hill and Seacliff. So a lot of really exciting projects, and that's on the lower south side of Bernal. And then we are about to go into talking about more of the heart of Bernal Heights around Portland and community and et cetera going on. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, so there's been a lot of different things that have happened over the years in Bernal Heights and a lot of activism and a lot of community involvement too. I think it was 1980s and 90s. That's when the go-karts or whatever, the boxcar.
The soapbox derby races were a thing up until basically the early 2000s. There was a group of adults who would just basically take over the park road around Bernal Hill and do a soapbox derby race, which was really, really fun and super duper cool. Yeah. I miss that. That's I'm not nostalgic about many things because I sort of feel like cities evolve, you just
got to go with it.
You just, to be nostalgic is to sort of miss the point of why you came here in the first place. But,
so they stopped that because it just actually,
I think a lot of people who were doing it just got older. I think mostly just people aged out of it. Yeah. And then there wasn't a group behind them more than anything else. It wasn't like anything terrible happened. I just know they were all getting older. They were starting to
Yeah.
have other things going on.
So I was fascinated by that, and then I went to watch some YouTubes yesterday.
Yep.
And I saw back in the days what it was like. I actually didn't see kids; they were adults.
Yeah, it was all adults. It was all adults but kids would come along. Like the adults would let the kids ride, but it was not for kids at all.
No,
It was
not at
totally
all.
for adults.
It looked a little dangerous too.
It was
honestly.
totally dangerous.
I was like, I don't know, here you go. Like, what if you go
Completely
to the
dangerous.
side?
Yeah.
Right? But then they showed something right now, current day. They have an organized one at McLaren Park.
Oh yeah.
That's completely different.
It's completely different. Yeah, the SF MoMA does one that is a little bit more like an art car,
Exactly.
art soapbox. It's really cool, but not as dangerous.
Not crazy off the rails.
It's very slow.
And there's a
People
lot
like,
of rules. And
Yeah.
actually, the thing that was really great about the one in Bernal Heights is that it was specifically called the illegal soapbox derby.
illegal.
They called it illegal,
I
and
can see
what
that.
made it that's what made it fun is that there was absolutely no attempt to seek permission. They would basically put their own signs up and just say,
Yeah.
hill closed, we're racing. They would sweep it up by themselves.
Yeah.
They would basically clean the path because there's a lot of rocks and gravel, so they would sweep it all,
Right.
and then they would run basically on a Sunday morning from like 8 in the morning until like 1 in the afternoon,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
with no permission, no anything.
And I think that's very Bernal.
That's very Bernal.
Even the housing, right? There's so many illegal things going on with housing, with
Yeah.
interesting layouts, and
Yes, there's a lot. The shape of the hill means that houses in Bernal, they tend to be weird because they're often adapted to sort of relatively small lots to begin with, but with then weird topography going on that you can't necessarily see from street level. There's a hill, there's a stream, there's a rock, a giant rock or something that all the houses are kind of always having
there'll be like an interesting extra room that was like randomly built on the side.
Right.
I mean, it's definitely in real estate world, like, oh, that house is very Bernal is a thing.
Right.
That's a
Right,
thing.
right.
But
Yeah.
I love that. I love, that the streets are very narrow and small. And I think also because you're on a hill and you have to go up from Mission and then down, up from Bayshore, like up from everywhere, obviously. That and the fact that it doesn't have a lot of like train lines going through it.
Right.
There isn't a ton of public transportation. It has given it its own kind of unique set aside flavor.
That is what I think defines Bernal is that it is kind of very close to everything, but at the same time slightly removed, which has allowed it to be its own thing. You don't drive through Bernal because it's an easier way to get from point A to point B. Again, this is why we have 101, 280, Cesar Chavez, and Mission Street. So it's not faster to go through Bernal. Public transit is relatively limited through Bernal. So it just tends to have its own little microcosm.
Yeah, it lets it keep its own unique character.
But the average lot size in Bernal is like 1,700, right? Oh,
something like that.
Much
It's like
smaller
it's
than
70 by 25 instead of 100 by 25. So they are smaller. And then also, the other thing is that Bernal Heights has the largest concentration of earthquake shacks in the entire city.
Very interesting. Very interesting
So that was,
topic.
like after they had them all out at Presida Park,
Right.
And then a lot of the people, I guess the way that they worked it out is they would pay a certain amount of money and then they would own the earthquake shack at the end of it.
They were pretty easy to buy. They were pretty cheap, but you had to remove it.
Right.
So you were
take it somewhere.
So literally, there's all these pictures you can see of like basically a little shack. You're showing up a picture of the park itself. Yeah, full of these shacks, and then those shacks, each one of those would end up on essentially an ox cart, and somebody would cart it away and buy a piece of land and plop it down, and this is very Bernal. This is the very Bernal housing thing. It's not just earthquake shacks. My backyard neighbor has this. It's just accretion. Like you'll start out with a small box,
Right.
and then at some point in the 20s, somebody added another
room to it.
Another wing, and then somebody else came along in the 50s and added another wing.
Okay.
And somebody came along 15 years later, added another little room, and that's really, really Bernal. And that's the case with a lot of the earthquake shacks, but it's true of a lot of houses. Like my backyard neighbor, she just passed away recently, but her house has no street access, zero. You cannot get to her house without walking through somebody else's.
Has like some easement.
Yeah, it has an easement.
Is that right?
But there is no street access at all.
Okay.
Very Bernal.
Very Bernal. And from the front of it, you can see what it originally was. It was like one of those kind of houses like you see in the Old West, where it had like just a little kind of Cape Cod shed with one of those Western fronts, the flat Western fronts.
Mm-hmm.
That was the original house. And I can't see this from my house, so I didn't know all this until after she passed away, and I finally was able to really go look at stuff. And but then there was somebody built like a pretty terrible addition at one point, and then
didn't match at all.
Well, like when I say terrible, like I was looking down at the foundations of it, and I'm like, there aren't many of them.
I was gonna say, do they all have foundations, or is that partial foundation?
It has like
Depends
some.
on your definition.
It has some very bad concrete set in the dirt, and then there's like then there's little offshoots from that addition that are sticking out. These are all the things that I've been looking at for 20 years. But yeah, that's very Bernal.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the earthquake shacks were a lot like that, where they would start out with a little thing, and then they would just get
or they put two of them together.
Or they put two of them together. And yeah, so that is a very Bernal style of architecture.
Because they were supposed to be like 200 square feet or something, the original earthquake shacks. And the houses we're seeing on the market, they're
they usually build
1,400.
800 square feet.
Yeah, so there's several.
Yeah, there's one in contract right now that's at 20 Newman.
Yeah.
And then there was one that sold in 2018 for $1,415,000, which is wild for an earthquake shack.
I'm sure there's probably like three splinters of like the whole story of the ship of Theseus. The ship that it's like this old philosophical paradox of like if you have a ship and you keep it for a long time, you end up replacing so many parts. Right. Is it still the same ship?
Like us and all of ourselves.
That's what
right, just like cell. Right, that's
7
called
years. Right,
right. That's called the ships of Theseus problem. And anyway, the earthquake shacks in Bernal are probably a lot
same thing. We just call them earthquake shacks, and they look beautiful. Actually, I was looking at some pictures.
That's probably a good indication that there's nothing original.
Yeah, there's some that are original-ish, and then there's some that are completely rebuilt.
Yeah,
for the ones sold over Manhattan, they're probably rebuilt.
Yeah, and then. So are you very aware of Bernal Heights has its own building code in different areas?
I know quite a bit about the Bernal Heights Historical Use District, or historical something. It's a controversial subject.
Yeah. Should we not get into it?
No, I'm not going to get into it.
Why? Like what? What's so different?
Why? Well, one of the great things about Bernal was I was able to talk to a lot of people. I never actually really wrote about this. So basically, at some point in the early 1990s, somebody somewhere on the west side of the hill, what I call on my map Foggy Vista, was trying to build a duplex. And basically some other neighbors thought that it was just a monstrosity. Too big, out of scale. Again, it was just a duplex. And then there was an effort by a bunch of neighbors to try and make sure that things would always have Bernal characteristics, that you had to build, the whole notion of neighborhood character.
Could be over 30.
They basically were able to, through the city, have Bernal defined as a special design district with its own little mini review boards. There's a couple of them for different parts of the hill. A bunch of very, very unique requirements about new construction and renovation, mostly around having to do with setbacks. Parking requirements. There's going to be a lot of different opinions on that. Up until now, it was just treated as an advisory process. There are these design review committees within the neighborhood, which were all volunteer, and they were very mixed. I have some friends who have done them because they were YIMBYs, basically, and some who were doing them because they were NIMBYs.
Yes, in my backyard, no in my backyard.
Yes, in my backyard, and no. And some people would do it for both reasons. So more recently, people have become more thoughtful, I think, about the trade-offs of limiting housing. But that was, until pretty recently, I would say that was not so true. And they were often very contentious. Even if the recommendations of the design review boards were not legally binding, they did have an impact on the planning process. And so, basically it was a desire to preserve the neighborhood character, the uniqueness that we all talk about and celebrate. And it's true, we do. But it has also had the effect of really, really limiting housing production. And I think, I want to say, I might get my year wrong, but I'm going to say something like maybe 2022 or 2023, Bernal built zero housing.
What?
Zero.
Wow.
So, I mean, I have been keeping an eye on this statistic. It was always low, but I want to say sometime very, very recently, Bernal built exactly zero new units. People are now starting to propose higher density housing on some of these weirder lots because essentially state action has meant that the Bernal's unique building codes no longer really hold sway, and the state has said you have to build these things, and no, you can't have parking requirements, no, you can't have single family only requirements.
And then it starts getting very contentious because some of these things, I know that also they've made things where if you're adding an ADU, you can kind of hop and skip past a lot of the requirements, and unfortunately some people are utilizing that, and then that's not an ADU that anybody's ever going to live in. Right?
Yeah, there's all these things.
Just adding,
just finding a way to get what they want, and that's unfortunately what happens sometimes.
But we're moving into a phase where state law is starting to supersede a lot of the local requirements in the city in general, and specifically in Bernal Heights, which again does have its own thing, that have been held sway for about 30 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we'll see what the future brings.
Hopefully, more new construction, or some building at least.
Yeah,
not zero.
I've always said that Bernal's a great neighborhood and more people should be able to enjoy it. I also tend to think that specifically along things like Cortlandt Avenue, like I've known tons and tons of Cortlandt. We should take a minute to talk about Cortlandt, of course, because it is one of
the main business.
I'll get to that in just a second. But basically, the thing that Cortlandt is Bernal's main street. It's kind of Main Street USA in the middle of the city. If you've ever been to Vermont, you'll find Cortlandt Avenue feels very familiar.
Yeah.
It really does feel like you're in the middle of a little town, Mayberry, USA, in the middle of the city. It's got a terrific collection of small businesses. They're all locally owned. There's a small supermarket.
Good Life.
Good Life, our fabulous local supermarket. There's a butcher shop, Avadanos. There's a couple coffee shops. There's a lovely collection of restaurants. There's a couple. More recently, we've got some, I'm calling them upscale boozeries, like specialized liquor stores.
You can get all the booze you
fancy
want.
Fancy booze. There's a lot of fancy booze.
The tequila.
There's a tequila shop, and then there's also like the Epicurean Trader, which is kind of
and
a little
healthy
bit
spirits.
What's it?
And
healthy spirits. So there's a bunch of stuff like that. So it's a great little strip. However, and this goes circle back to the housing thing, most of the merchants who are there, and I've known lots of them, all say the same thing, which is it's a great place. The customers are wonderful, but you only really get local business because of all the geography that we were just talking about, the hills and all those things. So they struggle because at the end of the day, it's a relatively small set of potential customers. And so basically building more housing, especially along the Cortlandt stretch, would really help. All the things that make Cortlandt magical and more sustainable.
Definitely, yeah. You know what I think is interesting is there's such a large concentration of kind of artistic places in Cortlandt Street. Like there's
there's Inclusions Gallery, which is run by a woman who's owned the place for a long time and both focuses on local artists, and that she's been able to keep a gallery going for I think almost 20 years is just an incredible accomplishment. And this is also something else worth saying about Bernal is that it is genuinely home to an unbelievable concentration of creative people.
Yes. Yeah.
Like
I would agree.
I come from the journalism world. A lot of famous journalists who live in San Francisco live in Bernal.
Okay.
An awful lot of industrial designers who work in the technology industry, not people who are engineers, but mostly who are designers, tend to live in Bernal. An incredible concentration of musicians. I know 2 or 3 nationally famous musicians who live in the neighborhood. The guy who runs one of the biggest music production companies in the city lives in Bernal. A lot of great architects live in the neighborhood. So it is just a real cluster of people who are in creative industries. And that's something that nobody created. That's what I love about it. They're there because they ended up there and they want to be there.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with the personality of just the neighborhood and the way that it is kind of divided away from everything. And also all of the natural beauty, right? I mean, you have the hill there.
Yeah.
You can go up, you can get the most incredible views of 360-degree views of the city. You've got Holly Park, which is also another great view area that has playgrounds and all that.
Yeah. Should we have a moment for Bernal Hill? I mean, it's a wild park. It's kind of like undeveloped part at the very summit of Bernal Hill, 444 feet above sea level. I've learned at one, but it's really cool because it's like a wild hilltop.
Coyotes,
and in the middle of the city. Obviously, for if you have a dog, Bernal is also a great neighborhood for dog people because of that. It's just it's this wild open air park, kind of like Glen Park or kind of like Twin Peaks, but a little bit more intimate because it's right in the middle of everything else.
And it's a lot of land. I mean,
it's big.
Yeah, I'd go from my house in St. Mary's and I'd do a run and go up around the hill. And then, I mean, just if you go early in the morning and you're almost watching the sunrise, I mean, it's just incredible. And it feels
beautiful. Yeah.
Because it's a big, bold hill, right? It's like you've got so much, it just feels like this amazing expansiveness in a city that's incredibly dense.
And on top of it is that old, was originally a microwave antenna. Yeah, I call it Sutrito Tower, but like, this little antenna, I always thought, we named it Sutrito Tower because it's like a little version of Sutra Tower. But what I really always think is like, first of all, like, nobody would ever allow that to happen now, which I'm not sure how I feel about that. But I kind of like it because I think like, our hill has a party hat. It's like a little party hat on the top of the hill.
Well, speaking of a party hat, when I was a kid, me and my friends used to drag our kegs up to the top.
Oh,
of the
kegs, good, yeah.
All the way up to that?
Yes.
That's a good story.
Right.
I mean, I would have, well, again, generationally, that was probably generationally appropriate.
Yes.
Yes. But even before that, what I also have heard lots of stories, again, not my thing, and also not something kids these days would probably do. Kids used to just take cardboard.
Oh, yeah.
And just slide down.
Totally. I've done that.
That's scary.
Definitely done that. Yeah, no, I spent a lot of time on Bernal Hill as a kid. Not just finding cockroach TVs. And then there's the rock up there, right? That people paint.
Yeah, the rock is one of those fascinating things that I love. There's this rock, for anybody, on the north side of the hill, overlooking the city. It's just literally a rock.
It's a rock, yeah.
That was just put there to kind of act like a barrier. And over the last decades, various neighbors just go up there and paint it.
Yeah.
And so it evolves from like weird, whimsical pieces of art to political messages to pieces of art. Anyway, it constantly evolves, and no one person does it.
I was going to say, so anyone can just decide you're going to paint it over.
Yeah.
Whatever you want. And then the next person can come next day.
Totally.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it's been a great thing. It's been sometimes a contentious thing.
Yeah.
Someone might get really angry.
Well, yeah, again, the political messages, I mean, I'm less of a fan of the political messages, only because a political message is great when you're into it, but if you're not into it, it's kind of alienating to a lot of people. And again, there's ups and downs to it. But the political messages are there for a while, and then somebody will turn it into a candy corn. And then the political message come up, and somebody will turn it into the poop emoji.
Yeah.
And so
the question is, have you done it?
I have not. When I was running Bernalwood, I always just said that elves and gnomes do it. Because I was always a strong believer that there's a lot of things in the neighborhood we don't want to know the answer. Mm-hmm. Like, they're better if we celebrate them, but don't try and fully understand them. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a lot of things where I would just be happier just sort of saying this happened, and let's not ask any more questions about how.
No, I like that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Do we know what it is now, today?
I don't know what it is.
I haven't looked yet.
So, like you mentioned, there's coffee shops, and obviously there's the bakeries. I brought the baked goods here for us, but Black Jet.
Black Jet is fantastic.
And Bernal, it's the Bernal Bakery. They came up during the pandemic.
Oh yeah, this is again a classic Bernal story. Bernal Bakery was started during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Again, this is so Bernal. Because I did this literally. So in the middle of the pandemic, you remember the bread phase when everyone
was making bread.
Everyone was making bread. I was not making bread. I don't make bread. But there was a guy who started making bread who had worked at maybe it was Tartine, but basically he had worked at some of the better bakeries around the city. Started baking in his home, and then, this was the charming part. Through the worldwide internet, people started learning that he was doing this. They were literally, because of the social distancing, they had essentially set up a winch and a basket from their house. Their house was kind of in one of those Bernal things. It's kind of up on a hill, just a little bit from the sidewalk.
Right.
So they had this fence, and they would basically look over the fence. They would lower a wicker basket to you. You'd put money in the basket, and then a loaf of bread would come down, or you do Venmo or whatever. And it
Or you
was
do Venmo. Okay.
yeah, or you Venmo. But the basket was real. The basket was not on Venmo. And the bread was absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
And I did literally go do it. You go and the basket comes down, and you're like, all right, this is if you're going to have to be in quarantine, this is a pretty good way to do it. The best part about that is that kick-started that guy's
Career.
his business, and now he has his own shop on Cortland called Bernal Bakery, which still makes the same fantastic bread that he lowered from a basket so many immunizations ago.
Oh,
I know. Oh my gosh.
That's
And then-
interesting.
Progressive Grounds, which has been around forever.
Progressive Grounds is it's like the OG coffee shop. It's like it definitely feels like the 1970s in there.
Totally.
The name is very 1970s. Everything about it is like super old school.
Yeah, it's like going in a time machine.
Yeah, it's like a little time machine. Again, like you ended up in some place in Vermont, some weird little coffee shop in Vermont. But it's great.
And I guess they have the chess club that meets in the backyard every Saturday.
Oh, great.
At 6 or something like that. And Aziz Ben Arafa, I don't know if you know him, he was one of the co-owners. He's no longer a co-owner, but he now has his own catering business that I have to give a plug for called Couscous Bowl. And I'll put the contact information in the notes. But we had a Moroccan
that's
party
right.
here,
He came here
and he catered the whole thing.
That's
and
awesome.
his food is just unbelievably delicious. So if you need a caterer, he's pretty amazing. Yeah, so Pinhole Coffee. They have the Amos Goldbaum painting on the side there.
I did a post. This is when I was still doing Bernalwood, where somebody's going to start a new coffee shop on Cortland. There were so many comments about the last thing we need is another coffee shop. It's just part of this.
Right.
Stupid hipsters always opening coffee shop. Well, Joellen, who opened the coffee shop, was just an incredibly thoughtful and community-minded person, and Pinhole almost instantly became again one of those little jewels in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. This woman this shop making fantastic, more gourmet coffee than down the street. But she created an incredibly warm atmosphere and an incredibly strong place for people to get together. Mm-hmm. And now the place is, an institution. It's actually been 10 years. But the classic Bernal thing is the much complaining before actually it opens.
Is that right? That's a classic.
That's very Bernal to complain about it. But then once it's there...
I think it's very San Francisco.
Yeah, it's very San Francisco.
I was just looking at the koi fish there yesterday. They
the painting?
Yeah, the painting
of
koi
fish,
yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's lots of little bits of art everywhere. And I just wanted to mention Martha Brothers because that's very neighborhoody and it's kind of the center of the neighborhood. And
the other business that just opened that I'll put a plug in, even though I have nothing to do with it, but is Go Duck Yourself.
Oh, I just drove
which
by
is a
that.
fantastic story, basically.
Yeah, tell us.
And I learned this again. This is all sort of ultimately for me. This was a fire truck experience. There was a duck restaurant in Chinatown that was run by the dad.
Okay.
I'm forgetting.
Very famous.
Hing Long. That was it. Hing Long.
Okay.
And it was in Chinatown. It was very famous.
Mm-hmm.
Dad was getting old. The kids were running the business.
Okay.
Started taking over the business. The kids are in their 30s.
Mm-hmm.
The kids are getting frustrated with just kind of Chinatown. Basically the economics of Chinatown.
Right.
The pandemic happens, and they started doing a lot of DoorDash during the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
And they realized a lot of their customers were in the southern part of the city. Like Portola, the southern half of the city was where a lot of their actual takeout customers were. And they were running it under a different name, Go Duck Yourself. And basically, long story short, is they decided to tell their Chinatown landlord to screw off. They closed the shop in Chinatown. Completely. Okay. And moved and I think it doesn't matter if they bought or renovated, but they basically opened up shop on Cortland and called Go Duck Yourself.
Roast duck.
Roast duck.
Okay.
Still doing a banging takeout business. It's fantastic. It's so good.
Is it? Yeah, that's
it's
what
unbelievable.
I was reading, that it was really good.
And you can go to the place and that's good, but you don't need to. The point is just it does takeout. So it's so good.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
Wow.
There's a lot of really good places. What are some of your favorites?
Well, that's a great one. And Cortland does have really good restaurants. I've not been there, but everyone else who has loves it. It's Third Cousin, which is actually sort of like a...
That's my special occasion.
That's like a special occasion. It might even have a Michelin something. It has a Michelin something.
Yeah.
There's an izakaya now, a Japanese restaurant, which is good. There's the Italian place.
Vega,
which is really good.
That's been around for a long time. Actually, it was Valentine's before it was Vega.
Yep.
I used to go. I don't know if it's the same owners or not, but it's
it
very
is.
similar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vega is again
Yeah.
really good. Way better than you think. So that's all in Cortland, and then, like I said, we claim Mission Street, and if you really look at Mission Street, the Bernal stretch of Mission Street, it's one of the richest food corridors in the city. Like I've lived around the corner for 20 years, and I still don't feel like I've scratched the surface, and I go a lot. So endless. There's Emmy's Spaghetti Shack, Blue Plate, a whole bunch of Chinese restaurants, a whole bunch of Mexican restaurants,
Pizza
Peruvian
Hacker.
restaurants,
Right.
really good pizza, really good ramen restaurant, some Indian food, including Zante's Pizza, which is making Indian pizza.
Are they still open?
I actually got it 2 weeks ago.
Because I love their Indian.
Yeah,
pizza.
they were doing Indian pizza well before that was
And
a thing.
Tilak, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
Indian
there's a
place
couple.
right
There's a little cluster of Indian restaurants. It's just
there. There's so many.
There's a new Taiwanese restaurant there. It's unbelievably rich. And again, people don't think of that as Bernal, but if you're in Bernal, that's your doorstep.
Well, and for me, especially when I used to live on St. Mary's, because I was really on the other side.
Right.
of
Then
that.
there's even more on that side of
Yeah,
Mission Street
which is
too.
like almost closer to Glen Park, but still part of Bernal. So that was that one portion of Mission Street. And then for the pupusas, right? You've got all this.
Right. It really is like one of the most. And then also we're going to talk about bars too.
Yes.
We got to talk about the Royal Cuckoo, which is like
yes.
the Royal
on
Cuckoo
Mission.
on Mission and Valencia. It's a great dive bar. It looks like a dive bar, but it's not really a dive bar. But it also has a Hammond organ,
What's that?
You'd know it if you saw it. You'd recognize the sound. It's like an organ, like an electric organ that has a spinning thing in a box,
Okay.
and you recognize the sound. It sounds very
Okay.
60s
Okay.
because it was just it used a lot in jazz and a lot of progressive
very cool.
music in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a Hammond organ there, and on weekends there's a guy who knows how to play it really well, and somebody will just show up with a trumpet, and you'll sit in that place having a drink, listening to the Hammond organ, and you're like, this is one of the best bars in the world.
Really?
Yeah. It's
Okay, we'll
Very
go
cool.
try that.
unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then we haven't even talked about Cedar Park.
A lot of people think of Cedar Park as like Dolores Park without the hipsters. It's like the low key Dolores Park.
Is
Yes,
that
this
right?
is the northernmost part. It's
Yeah.
like closest to downtown Potrero Hill.
Yeah, closest just off Cedar Chavez. It's a very old park, one of those old oval shaped parks that they
Right.
used to make in the Victorian age, and it is old.
Which
Precita
used to
Street
be
is one.
very seedy back in the 80s.
It was it was just before I got there, but yeah, the 80s and 90s it was apparently pretty rough, but now it is pretty fantastic. So it has a couple of really good restaurants, a really fantastic corner store,
Really affordable. Like,
Yeah.
really good stuff.
and Precita Park Cafe, which is like a really good coffee shop and breakfast place. So pretty lucky.
Yeah, a lot of people have their kids' birthdays there.
Yep.
at Cedar
Yeah,
Park.
and in fact, again, I live right by there. So, like every weekend, there's like a bouncy house.
Yeah.
I'm watching like the bouncy house industrial complex
Oh my gosh.
every weekend.
Yeah, and then there's Precita Eyes there, right? There's the
Precita Eyes has a
art.
spot there. They have one on 24th, which was like a community mural workshop that's been there for a long time. There's a really great new Mexican restaurant that opened about a year ago from Yucatan.
Los Yaquis.
Yeah, Los Yaquis.
Yeah.
That's really
Okay.
good. And then there's Charlie's Cafe,
Right.
which is a Middle Eastern coffee shop and
Do they have
bakery.
music sometimes?
He
or
does
something?
music,
Okay.
yeah. Really, really good. Yeah, there's just great stuff there.
And going back to bars, if we're
Yeah, I was
jumping
gonna
over
say.
the hill, over on Cortlandt Street, you have the Horseshoe, right?
the Lucky Horseshoe, which is
The dive bar.
but like
they have music.
very it's
They have
very
good
lots
music.
of music. Yeah, classic old dive bar has
Yeah.
been through several names, but does not ever really change, even if the name changes.
Yeah.
Lucky Horse is great.
And then the Wild Side West, which has
Wild
been
Side West.
around, I think it's the longest operating lesbian bar in the city.
It is one of them for sure,
Mhm.
and but is a kind of a classic lesbian bar. But the other bonus is the backyard of the
Mhm.
of the Wild Side West is
What?
there's this backyard area of the bar that really
Okay.
looks like somebody's backyard. Like it's it's like broken furniture and like Christmas lights all year, and but it's very cozy and intimate as a result.
Yeah.
It really does feel like you're in one of your friend's backyard.
Intimate. I
Okay.
think it's definitely
It's funky but fabulous.
I don't know. When I look at the name, I'm thinking about like line dancing, country dancing. I don't know where.
Oh yeah, no, they don't
It's wild
have
time, 'cause
nowhere
it's
near
wild
enough
time.
room for that.
Like, oh, okay.
No, they don't do that.
Holy water.
Yeah, Holy Water. That's
Yeah,
been
Holy
around for
Water's
a
like the
while now.
hipster bar, but it's really
Yeah.
good. They have great drinks.
Yeah.
One place makes really, really good drinks.
Yeah, hipsters. That was, I guess the first. Well, it was the yuppies, right? And then
Right.
it was the hipsters.
And it was
Then-
techies. Yeah, we always need
The
people.
techies,
we,
yeah.
need, we need to complain about
We need to
some
complain
group
about
of
some
people
different
who
groups.
are younger than we are always.
Exactly. That's so true. But then in 2014, then Redfin named Bernal the hottest neighborhood in the country. I don't know if you were aware of that.
I was aware. I wrote about
Of course
that.
you were.
So, yeah. And I felt it was completely deserved.
Yeah, exactly. So that caused a lot of buzz back then. But yeah, I mean, definitely Bernal Heights has gone through a lot of different iterations. It's got great weather,
Yep.
comparatively speaking, to some other areas in the city.
It's a lot warmer for sure.
Yeah, it gets really good weather, and and it's evolving. I live on Procida itself, which is
Right.
kind of a pedestrian highway if you're going between Mission
Okay.
Street and the rest of Bernal, because you're not going to really walk along Cesar Chavez.
Right.
And what I love about it is it's like a constant parade of people walking their dogs and people pushing baby strollers, and the baby strollers are what you love to see, because that's
Okay.
like people.
New people.
Yeah, that's people saying, I want to be here and this is where we want to live and we're going to plant some roots here. So I'm happy to say there's still an awful lot of baby strollers being pushed up and down Procida, which I think is a really good sign.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also because Bernal has smaller houses, so there's a large percentage of starter homes.
Younger families.
Yeah.
Yeah,
younger
it's a
families.
little bit more affordable because of that.
Yeah.
I don't know what the cost per square foot is, but because there
About
are
1,000.
because there are fewer square feet, it becomes more affordable.
More
yeah.
affordable for
Yeah.
most people, right?
And that is the reputation it's had for, I want to say, probably almost 40 years. It's like it's a great starter neighborhood.
Yeah.
A lot of people stick around, but it's certainly a place where a lot of people buy their first home in the city.
Yeah, and there's so many things for, if people are newer to the city, there's a lot of community involvement and groups that you can join and events that you can go to, right? They have Festival on the Hill, they have the holiday stroll stuff. They have, all kinds of ways to be involved.
Yeah, it's a highly engaged neighborhood.
And you can also move to other part of Bernal, have a bigger house, right? As you guys were talking about. So you start in Bernal, you can still end in Bernal in
Yeah.
a different part.
Well, yeah, it's evolving. It's evolving.
Yeah, oh, and then I can't miss the Alamany Farmers Market.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
That whole thing, because the eastern side, that's, if you look at the map and you'll see the different areas. So if we're talking about Alamany
I call it
Alamanistan.
Alamanistan because it's kind of dry. and dry and a crossroads between two great freeways.
Yeah.
Alamany Farmers Market and the
Been around
flea market
forever.
on Sundays is been going on since the 40s.
Right.
And it's fantastic. Again, unbelievably high quality, unbelievably affordable. One of the most charming places ever. Everybody in the city knows it. It's like it's not a secret, but it really is in your backyard, so it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
And then on Sunday it becomes a flea market, which is not the kind of dude selling socks. Not that kind of a flea market. It is like vintage stuff.
You could waste
it's
many,
really
many hours there.
it's great. So, and again, if you've ever been to the Alameda flea market, it's like a miniature version of that. That's not quite as overwhelming. So
without having
pretty
to
great.
cross the bridge,
Without all the
deal with all of that. Yeah, and then there's a few schools in the area. There's the Paul Revere Elementary.
Yep, and Leonard Flynn,
Mhm.
Leonard Flynn on Procida Park, Revere, and then there's one more I'm forgetting.
The Junipero Serra.
No,
which is
Juniper
on
Sarah,
the
that's right, the
west
one over
kind of
by Holly
mission
Park.
side. And they have the gardens
Yep.
there that they did. They have the goats that go out there every year. But yeah, so there's definitely options for schools as well. There's a couple of parochial schools as well.
Yeah, I live right across from St. Anthony's. That's my front yard, and that's a parochial school that's been around more than 100 years.
100 years.
Yeah, so, and then if you want to get around from there, there's the 67 Bernal Heights bus, which kind of really just goes around Bernal Heights mostly. And then the 24 to Visadero, which will take you all the way over
Right.
the marina.
That goes
then
up and
to
down,
Bayview.
up and down Portland.
And then if you need to get, downtown Mission, you just roll down to Mission Street.
Yeah, worth mentioning just a couple other options too. If you live on the north side where I do, I mean, I live in Bernal, but the really nice thing is the Mission is still my front yard in a lot of ways. So from my house to the 24th Street BART is a 9-minute walk.
Oh, is that it?
So
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not bad.
many changes in worlds, but it's only 9 minutes.
Okay.
So on the north side of Bernal, BART commuting is actually
And if you're a bike
Very
person,
good.
you can get on
Bike
your bike
people,
and go
yeah.
anywhere from there.
that's good. There have been, the fantasy, of course, has always been a 30th Street BART station, but that probably won't happen in either my lifetime or my child's lifetime.
Many years.
But that would be great.
I'd like to see a funicular.
Yeah, I have a
Cool.
whole ski trail, ski lift map where the ski lifts should
If
go.
we're to get our snow.
Yeah, well,
The
let's see.
opposite direction of global warming. I think Bernal really is well positioned to be San Francisco's premier ski resort.
Absolutely.
But then the other thing that's really nice about Bernal Heights, which again I don't think anybody there takes for granted, is you really are close to everything, and not just in the cliche sort of a way. Like you really are close to everything. The airport is 12 minutes.
Hopping on freeways. Is
Hopping on the
super easy.
freeways, you're not driving 45 minutes before you can get on the freeway. The
Yeah.
freeway is right there, which makes it a great neighborhood for getting elsewhere. That's why a lot of people in technology
Right.
live there. It's because it's easy to head down the peninsula, easy to get across the Bay Bridge. So yeah, the location is kind of unspeakably convenient, but in this way that doesn't really call attention to itself.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
So I think that we covered a lot about Bernal Heights. I mean, is there anything else that you feel like people need to know that we haven't covered?
No, I mean, I think we've covered most of it. I mean, there's a lot of attractions, but I think the best thing you can do in Bernal Heights is spend time in Bernal Heights. And then the best way to really start to learn about why everybody's so enthusiastic about it is just walk around. And I will say walking is the way to do it because the other thing that Bernal Heights has, which again, I think is one of those really Bernal things, is there's secret stairways everywhere.
That's right.
And you don't
so
know
many hills.
you don't know about them if you're in your car, but if you're walking, you'll see them. And there's these.
Yeah, the Esmeralda stairs.
There's a lot of little
park
stairways that are
stairway.
just kind of everywhere, and that's one of the things that makes it really wild. You really get a feel for the place when you're on foot.
Yeah, just get lost in Bernal. You know?
Get
Just
lost in Bernal.
Park your car,
Okay, I like
walk
that.
around.
I like
I've done
that.
that many,
That's-
many
yeah.
times in my lifetime, and highly recommend
Still
it.
get lost in Bernal.
Well, Todd, thank you so much for joining us to talk about Bernal Heights. It was enlightening and always a joy to talk about that neighborhood. So
Very interesting.
thank
I
you.
love that you used to live there, or you grew up
Yeah.
there. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I grew up. Yeah, I did. I grew up there.
I love that you were a miscreant there. That was great.
Yeah, I was a miscreant, that's for sure. Yeah, no, I've lived there in 3 different portions of my life where I was 3 different people. So yeah, and
That's
I
great.
always keep going back. So thank you again, and we will see you all on the next one.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye.